Today I'd like to take you through one quick example of how to find a local maximum or minimum using your graphing calculator. In this particular problem, we're asked to sketch the graph of the function and then approximate the local or relative minimum and maximum to the nearest tenth. Let me go ahead and open up the graphing calculator. I've gone ahead and entered the equation into my graphing calculator. There are two things that I'd like you to check in the mode to make sure that we're all looking at the same thing as we're working through this problem. When you go to mode, the first thing that I would like you to select is the rounding feature. If the instructions tell us to round to the nearest tenth, then we want to set our calculator so that it rounds everything to one decimal place. Typically, we have float selected, which means that we don't round at all. 0 would mean that we have no decimals, and 1 would be the nearest tenth. Go ahead and set your calculator to this and press enter. After you've done that, I'd like to go about midway down and I'd like you to select Graph Table. Some of your calculators may say GT instead. Make sure you press enter, and now we'll go back to our equation. Once you've double checked and made sure that everything was entered correctly, go ahead and hit Graph. You'll notice that I have the table over here that shows me every point on my graph, and every one of these points is to the nearest tenth. To use the table, we can select Second Graph, and that allows us to move up and down the table and see specifically where those points are on our graph. This will help you with the sketching part of this problem. I'll give you a second to sketch your graph. Now that you have had a chance to sketch your graph, we're going to talk about some parts of this graph. In this assignment, it is asking us to only find the local or relative minimums and maximums. We can have multiple of both. In this particular problem, we have 2 relative maximums and we have 1 relative minimum. So how do I know that something is a maximum or a minimum? We are looking for a change in direction in the graph. If you do not see a change in direction occur, then there is not a maximum or a minimum. So at this point right here, you might say that it is a maximum because it looks like a mountaintop. It does definitely change direction in the graph. This one is a minimum. It looks like a valley. And this one, again, we have that mountaintop look. Occasionally, and just for example's sake, you might see a graph that kind of looks like this. This particular graph does not have a maximum or a minimum because I did not have a distinctive change in direction. None of these points here are below this point where we kind of start to see a turn, and so I would not be able to identify a maximum or minimum in this case. All right, so now it's time to find these points using our graphing calculator. We're going to use the calculate feature on our calculator, so we do that by selecting second trace. I'm going to find this first point, which is a maximum, and so in order to do that, I will select option number 4. The calculator tells me to go left bound. That means that it wants you to move your cursor to the left of the point that you want to find. You don't have to go very far left. Once you get your cursor there, you can hit enter. Then it says to go to the right. Move your cursor to the right of the point you want to find and hit enter. Now it says guess. You're not going to do anything except hit enter. And when you do that, you'll see the word maximum, which means you're done with this process. This particular point is at negative 0.9 and comma negative 4. If you want to write that on the graph, at this point, you can do that also. So we found this first location. This next one, we're going to look for this minimum. We'll use the calculator again to do this. Go to second, trace, but this time select number 3. The calculator tells us to be on the left of this point. We're already on the left, so I don't think you're going to need to move any. We'll hit enter. Now it says go to the right. Once you're on the right, hit enter, and it says guess, and we'll hit enter one more time. You can see you're done because you see the word minimum, and this minimum is located at 0, -5. So we have one more point to find. It is a maximum again. So we'll pull out the calculator, we'll go to the calculate menu, and we're going to choose number 4, maximum. We do need to move a little bit closer to this point so the calculator is not confused about which point we are focusing on. So we're going to move just on the left side of that point and hit enter. And then we'll move to the right side of that point, hit enter, and it says guess. So we'll hit enter one more time. This maximum occurs at 1.7, 0.2. Now, at the beginning of this lesson, I talked about absolute maximums and minimums. This particular problem does not ask us to find the absolutes, but I do want to talk about what they are. A relative or local maximum or minimum just means that this is the highest point in this region of the graph. So that's why we can have multiples. But an absolute means that it is the absolute highest or lowest point in the entire graph. This particular graph does have an absolute maximum at this location, but it does not have an absolute minimum. And the reason it does not have an absolute minimum is because this graph continues infinitely toward negative infinity.